I never thought I'd live long enough to forget the taste of hunger. Though I suppose that's what time does, softens the edges of memory, until even the sharpest ache dulls into something you can carry without flinching. It isn't that I don't remember. I do, but the remembering now is quieter, less insistent, like the hum of a kettle left too long on the stove, present, but no longer urgent. I was 23 when they brought us across the ocean, though I felt older than my mother had when she died, and younger than the girls I seen huddled in railway stations with nothing but a kerchief tied around their waists to hold their dresses closed. We weren't soldiers, not really, though the Americans called us prisoners all the same. Some of us had worked in clerical posts near the front, others in communications, a few in factories that churned out parts for engines we never saw assembled. I had been stationed near Bremen, typing requisition forms for spare tires and ration tins, my fingers stained with carbon paper, my mind blank with the sheer monotony of survival. When the Americans took us, I expected barbed wire and shouting, bread so stale it cut the roof of your mouth, water that tasted of rust. I expected punishment. What I did not expect was kindness, especially not the kind that came wrapped in flour and dripping with something they called gravy. The transport was cold, the ship groaning like a tired animal beneath our feet, and we slept in shifts on wooden bunks stacked 3 high, our breath fogging the air in shallow clouds. No one spoke much. There was nothing left to say. We'd been questioned, processed, photographed with our hair pulled back and our eyes fixed on some spot just past the camera lens, as if looking directly into it might somehow expose the hollows we'd become. By the time we reached the camp somewhere in the middle of America, though I didn't know the name, then the landscape had flattened into endless fields stitched together by telephone wires and fences that seemed more suggestion than barrier. The guards were young men, most of them barely older than the boys I'd watched march off to the east with their collars too tight and their boots too stiff. They looked at us with a kind of awkward pity, as though we were broken things they weren't sure how to fix, but felt responsible for all the same. We ate in a long hall with long tables, benches so smooth they must have been worn down by generations of hands, and the first morning there, after a night spent listening to the wind scrape across the prairie like dry leaves, they served us of all things biscuits. I remember staring at the thing on my plate as if it might bite me. It was pale, almost yellow in the morning light that slanted through the high windows, soft-looking but firm, split open and pooled with the thick, pale sauce that shimmered faintly with flecks of something dark pepper, I learned later, and bits of meat I couldn't name. I didn't touch it at first. None of us did. We'd learned suspicion like a second language, and hunger had taught us that generosity often came with strings too fine to see until they'd already cut. But the woman beside me, Helga, though I didn't know her name, yet she picked up her fork with fingers that trembled only slightly and took a small bite. She didn't say anything, just chewed slowly, her eyes narrowing, as if trying to solve a puzzle in her mouth. Then she took another bite, and another, until her plate was clean, and she was looking at the bowl of gravy set in the center of the table with a kind of stunned wonder I hadn't seen on anyone's face in years. When the guard passed by, a tall boy with a crooked smile and a name tag that read P. Miller, Helga cleared her throat and asked, in careful English, "Are there leftovers?" He stopped, blinked, then grinned like she'd told a joke. "Leftovers, honey, this is just breakfast." And he ladled her another helping, more than she'd had the first time, then looked around the table at the rest of us, still frozen with our spoons untouched, and said, "Go on, it's good. Better than it looks." I remember the sound of that, better than it looks. As if kindness could be untrustworthy simply because it wasn't wrapped in hardship. I picked up my biscuit then, warmed through the plate, and tore off a small piece. The gravy was rich, heavier than anything I'd tasted since before the war, with a depth that spoke of time and care, not just necessity. It wasn't just food. It was something else, something that assumed you would be there for lunch and dinner, and the next day, and the next. That assumption, more than the flavor, nearly undid me. I ate slowly, deliberately, as though if I went too fast, the spell would break and I'd wake up back in the cellar with the rats and the damp wool blanket pulled over my head. But the biscuit stayed warm. The gravy didn't vanish, and when I looked up, Helga was watching me with eyes that held the same question I hadn't yet voiced. Why are they feeding us like this? We weren't told much in those first weeks where we were, how long we'd stay, what they planned to do with us. But the meals came, regular as sunrise, and always with that strange, comforting dish. Sometimes it was sausage in the gravy, sometimes just bits of ham, but always the biscuit, always the sauce. The guards never hovered, never watched us eat with the sharp eyes of suspicion I'd grown used to. They joked among themselves, polished their boots on the porch steps, played cards in the mess hall after dark, with a radio humming softly in the background. It was all so ordinary, so utterly lacking in menace, that I began to distrust my own senses. Was this a trick? A slow unraveling meant to make us confess things we didn't even know? Or was it possible that here, in this flat, wind-scoured corner of a country I'd only seen in propaganda reels, people still believed in feeding strangers without demanding their soul in return? I started writing letters home, though I never sent them. There was no home to send them. To my street had been rubbled by 43, my father gone before that, my mother not long after, but the act of shaping words on paper soothed something restless in me. I wrote about the biscuits, about the way the gravy clung to the fork, about the guard who always saved the crusts of his own bread and left them on the edge of the bin for the birds that gathered each morning, their wings gray against the pale sky. Small things, quiet things, the kind of details that would have seemed foolish before the war, but now held the weight of something sacred. I began to notice other things too, the way the light changed over the fields at dusk, turning gold, then rose, then a deep blue so pure it hurt to look at, the sound of the women humming as they washed dishes, tunes half remembered from childhood, the way one of the guards, a boy named Evans with a stutter, he fought like a personal enemy, always made sure the tea was hot enough before he passed it down the line. These were not acts of heroism, they were not even acts of charity, not really, they were just human, and that was the strangest part of all. I think I began to heal, not all at once, not with any fanfare, but in the spaces between bites, in the quiet rhythm of days that no longer ended with fear coiled tight in my stomach. And yet, even as I ate, even as I slept through the night without waking to the sound of sirens, there was a part of me that held back, that refused to believe this piece was meant for me. Guilt is a peculiar companion. It doesn't shout, it whispers, it sits with you at meals and asks, softly, do you deserve this? I hadn't done anything especially terrible during the war. I hadn't turned anyone in, hadn't informed on neighbors, hadn't worn the armband with pride, but I hadn't done anything brave either. I'd kept my head down, typed my forms, rationed my bread, and hoped the bombs would miss my building. And when they didn't, when the world turned to ash and noise, I ran, not toward anything, just away. Survival, I told myself, was enough. But here, in this place where they fed prisoners biscuits and gravy like it was nothing, I wasn't so sure. Maybe survival wasn't enough. Maybe it never had been. The first time I asked for seconds, my voice barely above a whisper, the guard P. Miller again just nodded and filled my bowl without a word, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And maybe it was. Maybe in another life, in another country that hadn't spent the last 10 years sharpening its children into weapons, asking for more food wouldn't have felt like a confession. But it did. It felt like admitting I wanted to live. And wanting to live, after everything, felt like a kind of betrayal of those who hadn't made it, of the version of myself who once believed dignity meant refusing comfort in times of collective suffering. I carried that contradiction with me every morning as I walked to the mess hall, the wind tugging at my coat, the gravel crunching underfoot, the smell of baking flour already drifting through the air. I never spoke of it to the others. We didn't speak of much, really. There was an unspoken rule among us. The past stayed in the past, and the present was only as wide as the next meal. But sometimes, when I caught Helga's eye across the table, I saw the same wariness, the same quiet amazement, the same question flickering behind her gaze. What do we do with kindness when we've forgotten how to receive it? I don't know how long we stayed in that camp, months, I suppose, though time had a way of folding in on itself there. Each day so similar to the last that they blurred into a single, sustained breath. The seasons turned. The fields went from gold to white and back to green again. And still, the biscuits came. Still, the gravy. Still, the guards, with their easy laughter and their careful hands. I began to help in the kitchen, sometimes peeling potatoes, washing greens, watching the cook, a broad-shouldered woman named Mrs. Callahan with flour in her hair, and a laugh like a screen door slamming stir, the pot of gravy with a wooden spoon worn smooth from use. She never asked me about Germany. Never asked me about the war. She just showed me how to cut the fat into the flour for the biscuits, how to fold the dough, just so how to watch for the moment when the gravy thickened enough to coat the back of a spoon. That's the trick, she'd say, her voice soft but firm. You don't rush it. You let it be what it needs to be. I think she was talking about more than gravy. One morning, as I stood at the counter rolling out dough, my hands moving almost without thought, Mrs. Callahan paused beside me and said, "You're good with your hands." It wasn't praise, exactly just an observation, like noting the weather, but it lodged in my chest like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples outward I hadn't known were possible. I hadn't been told I was good at anything in years. Not since my mother said I folded laundry neatly. Not since my school teacher remarked that my handwriting was precise. To be seen, even in such a small way, felt dangerous. It made me want to hide. It also made me want to stay. And that wanting, that quiet, persistent wanting, was the first real sign that something inside me had begun to thaw. However reluctantly, I didn't answer her. I just kept rolling, the dough cool and yielding beneath my palms, the scent of butter and flour rising around me like a promise I was on tea sure I could keep. It was Mrs. Callahan who first asked me to teach her a German song. Not a marching tune, not anything with a flag or a slogan, just a lullaby, she said, something soft for her grandson, who couldn't sleep through thunderstorms. I hesitated. Songs felt like the last private things I had left, the ones I had de-hummed under my breath in the dark, to keep myself anchored when the world outside seemed determined to dissolve into chaos. But she stood there, wiping her hands on her apron, her eyes patient in a way that didn't ask for more than I could give. And so I sang, very quietly, the first few bars of Guten Abend, Guten Hut, my voice cracking on the second line, like it hadn't been used in years. She listened without moving, then nodded once, as if she'd understood something important, and went back to stirring her pot. The next day, she brought me a small jar of blackberry jam homemade. She saddened, didn't mention the song again, but sometimes, late in the afternoon, when the kitchen was quiet, and the steam from the sinks curled toward the ceiling like breath, I'd hear her humming it under her breath, slightly off-key, but tender in a way that made my throat tighten. I never corrected her. Some things are truer when they're imperfect. The camp began to feel less like a holding pen, and more like a place suspended between worlds, a pocket of stillness carved out of the larger storm. We were allowed to walk in the fields during daylight hours, always 2 by 2, always within sight of the fence, but the guards rarely followed us past the gate. The land was flat, yes, but not empty. There were wildflowers in the spring, small birds that darted between fence posts, the occasional rabbit bolting through the tall grass with its ears flat against its back. I'd walk with Helga most days, our arms linked not out of affection but out of habit, the way two trees might lean toward each other after years of wind from the same direction. We didn't talk much. What was there to say? The war wasn't over. Not officially, but it already felt finished for us, as though we de-stepped out of time and into this liminal space where nothing could touch us, not guilt, not grief, not even memory, if we kept walking fast enough. And yet, the quieter it got, the more I felt the weight of what I'd left behind. Not just the rubble of my street or the names of friends I'd lost, but the person I'd been before the world required me to turn hard, to make myself small enough to slip through the cracks unnoticed. I missed her sometimes, her certainty, her belief that kindness didn't always come with a price. I didn't know if she could ever come back. One afternoon, while we were mending sheets in the laundry room, a task we'd been assigned because our hands were steady, Helga suddenly said, without looking up, "Do you think they know?" I didn't ask who they were. I knew. She meant the ones at home, the ones who remembered us as we'd been when we left, not as we'd become. "No, what?" I asked, though I knew that too, that we're being fed like this, she murmured, her needle catching the light as it pulled thread through cotton, that they give us seconds, that they smile when we ask for more. She said it like it was a secret, like it was something shameful. And maybe, in another time, it would have been. In the Germany I'd left, need was a weakness, and gratitude toward an enemy was treason dressed in softer words. But here, in this room with the sun slanting through high windows and the smell of soap thick in the air, it felt like something else entirely. "They wouldn't understand," I said finally, and Helga nodded, her lips pressed into a line so thin it nearly disappeared. We didn't speak of it again, but the question lingered between us, as tangible as the sheets we folded and stacked. The biscuits and gravy became a kind of ritual. Not just the eating of them, but the way they were offered, with no expectation, no fanfare, just a ladle dipped into a pot, and a plate held out like it was the most natural thing in the world to feed someone who, by all logic, shouldn't be fed at all. I began to notice how the guards never watched us eat with that sharp, appraising look I'd seen in the eyes of overseers back home. They didn't count portions or check for hoarding. They simply believed without question, that we would take only what we needed, and that what we needed was enough. That belief, more than anything, began to wear away at the walls I'd built inside myself. Not all at once, not cleanly, but like water on stone, slow, persistent, inevitable. One morning, without thinking, I said thank you to P. Miller as he set down my plate. He looked surprised for just a moment, then smiled a real smile, not the practiced one he gave tourists or inspectors, and said, "You're welcome, Fraulein." And just like that, I was no longer just a prisoner number. I was someone who could say thank you and be heard. The war ended in Europe before summer. We heard the news over the radio in the mess hall, the static crackling between words like distant gunfire. There were no cheers among us, no tears, just a long silence, thick and heavy, as if we were all holding our breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. When it didn't, when the days went on, just as they had before, meals served on time, laundry sorted, letters still unsent, written in the evenings, we began to understand that this limbo might not end simply because the fighting had. Repatriation would take time, they told us. Paperwork, ships. And so we waited, tending to the routines that had become our refuge. I spent more time in the kitchen, learning to make dumplings, to fry apples with cinnamon, to thicken gravy without lumps. Mrs. Callahan never asked why I stayed so late, why I volunteered for extra shifts, why I sometimes stood by the window after dark just watching the stars blink awake over the fields. She just handed me another knife, another pot, another quiet task that required hands but not words. In that kitchen, I began to remember how to be still. Not the stillness of fear, not the frozen waiting of someone braced for impact, but the stillness of presence, the kind that comes when you finally stop running long enough to feel the ground beneath your feet. Helga was repatriated first. Her papers came through in early autumn, and she packed her few belongings: a comb, a sweater knitted from unraveled socks, a photograph of her younger brother she kept wrapped in wax paper without a word. The night before she left, we sat on the steps of the barracks, wrapped in blankets against the chill, and watched the moon rise over the fence line. "Will you go back?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the wind. "I don't know," I said honestly. Germany felt like a ghost town in my mind, full of echoes and missing faces. But America wasn't home either, not really, not yet. "Maybe I'll stay," I said, though I hadn't let myself think it until that moment. She nodded, as if she'd expected the answer, and rested her head on my shoulder for a long time. When she left the next morning, she didn't look back. I didn't blame her. Looking back was dangerous. It always had been. The camp emptied slowly after that, like a tide receding grain by grain. One by one, the women I'd shared biscuits with, whispered fears with, learned the names of American birds with, they vanished onto trains, onto ships, back into a world that had moved on without them. I stayed. My papers took longer, they said, complications. I didn't press for details. By then, I'd begun to suspect I didn't want to leave. Not because I loved America though. I was learning to appreciate its quiet generosity, but because leaving would mean returning to a life that no longer fit, like trying to wear a dress you'd outgrown years ago. The person I had been before the war wouldn't recognize the woman I'd become in this kitchen, with calloused hands and a voice that no longer shook when she spoke. And the woman I'd become didn't know how to exist in a place where kindness was rationed like sugar. Mrs. Callahan offered me a job when the camp finally closed. Her sister needed help at a boarding house in town, cooking, cleaning, mending. "You're good with your hands," she said again, the same words as before, but this time they felt like an invitation, not just an observation. I took it. I packed my few things: a dress, a pair of sturdy shoes, the jar of blackberry jam she'd given me all those months ago, and walked out the gate without looking back. The town was small, the boarding house smaller, but the kitchen was warm, and the work was honest. I never made biscuits and gravy for the guests. It felt too private, too tied to that strange, suspended time when food was more than sustenance. It was forgiveness, offered without condition. But sometimes, on quiet mornings when the house was still asleep and the light through the window was just right, I'd make a small batch for myself. I'd split the biscuit, pour the gravy slowly, watch it pool in the center like liquid gold, and eat it slowly, deliberately, as if each bite was a promise I was finally learning to keep to myself, to the past, to the future I hadn't known I was allowed to want. I never asked if there were leftovers, not because I didn't need them, but because I'd finally learned that some things are given freely, and you don't have to earn the right to be full.